Is it time to panic about the state of the Utah men's basketball program? Let's discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College. That's all caps, no spaces. Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code Locked On College, all caps, no spaces, at Gametime today. My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department, and on today's show, we're talking all things Utah men's basketball. It's something we don't get to do a ton of on this show as we focus on a lot of football content, but I think with the widespread frustrations that I've seen on social media, I think it is a good time to bring it up. Also flying solo on today's show as well, so kind of a change of pace for you guys who would like the change up of hearing me a guest. Just going to be me today. We'll have some guests back on next week, but when talking about the men's basketball program, answer the question I posed off top. Is it time to panic about the state of the program? I would say no, not right now. But if Utah doesn't continue to add some things in the transfer portal, I think it is fair to panic, because let's talk about what Utah lost, right? Utah has only three players who scored in double figures last year. Two of them left. One of them is back, of course, in Gabe Madsen. But they haven't replaced that scoring. And you can say, yes, they've added guys. And we're going to talk about those pieces individually, just like we're also going to talk about Keba, Keita going to BYU. So what Utah needs to be looking for in the transfer portal, all that coming up. But Utah's added guys, right? Miro Little, if you're talking about him for one, Mason Madsen. So there's other Keanu Dawes. There's pieces there. Keller. Utah's added pieces. None of those guys averaged 10 points a game last year. None of those guys were the guy on their team last year. And that's where you look now and you're like, okay, Utah lost their guys last year because the way Smith emerged at the end of the season and Carlson. And yes, it's great to have Madsen back, but you need more than just Madsen, and you need more than these other pieces you currently have. So that's where it's nice that Utah has other roster spots still available. The transfer portal is still very much popping. There are tons of quality players in the portal, and I think Utah is going to be able to add some more players. I don't think it's time to panic yet. If this was lock and key, Utah's roster, I'd be ready to panic, because I think that is a fair word to use when your roster unequivocally from last year to this coming year, when you lose players like Brandon Carlson, Raleigh Wooster as well, who I know they didn't have for the second half of the season, but who did they also lose? Deivon Smith, the guy who replaced them with no clear replacement on the roster. I mean, this is a Utah team that just in general, of the players who average 5 or more points per game on their roster, only 2 of them are back. We already talked about Gabe Madsen. The other one of those is Lawson Lovering. That's a lot of production you have to replace. And some of the guys they replaced it with, as high as I am on the potential of a Miro Little and a Keller, I think those guys have a chance to be good. They're not proven commodities at the Division I level, because Little didn't have a great year at Baylor. He has potential, but wasn't great. Keller didn't get to play a ton. And yes, he played really well against Utah, but look at the totality of his college career, and he's an unknown. So I think that's where you see the sense of panic that a lot of fans have is you lost a lot. You haven't replaced the same equivocally. Like, okay, we lost Brandon Carlson, which you're never going to straight up replace Brandon Carlson, but getting a big guy in there who averaged 12 to 14 points a game would be an encouraging step, right? Even if it's like, okay, maybe, or just another forward that averaged in that range. If your justification is we want Lawson to go there too, right? So once again, like, I just feel like the basketball program as of right now, even with some of these additions, is worse than they were heading into last season. And why is that also a problem? You're going into an even tougher conference in the Big 12. Where the Pac-12 would be all over the place, right? The USCs of the world, we never knew what we were in for there. And yes, like Oregon had a better season this year than we maybe originally intended with some of the positive things they could do. But the Big 12, year in and year out, Houston, Baylor, Kansas, they're always going to be among the best 15 programs in college basketball. It is arguably the strongest college basketball conference of the teams that we kind of consider Power 4 conferences. We usually say that the Big 12 is the strongest. And then if you want to talk about the Big East being that not normally associated with a Power 4 conference, and just in terms of, because we think Power 4 for football, but obviously the Big East deserves to be elevated there. So this team is currently worse than they were last year, entering a tougher conference in a make or break year for Craig Smith, it feels like. I want to say this also. I think the Utah coaching staff does a good job. I think X's and O's wise and things of that nature. I think they do a good job. But just like they've hit on some transfers, right? Deivon Smith being a great example. Lawson Lovering this last season gave Utah some quality things. There's also been the Mike Saunders, right? That didn't work out great. And then he has a better years at McNeese State, right? And you even get a guy like a Dave Jenkins who started off the year nice and then really cooled off at the end of the year. So they've had some hits, they've had some misses. And obviously the biggest thing that Coach Smith and his team are just going to have to clean up this coming season are those really disappointing road losses. And it's even tougher to win on the road in the Big 12. So I think just the fact of Utah fans knowing what's coming, it's understandable why they're in panic mode. A lot of them are. And as I said, I won't be far off if there are not other additions made to this roster, because right now on paper, they're probably one of the 5 worst teams in the Big 12. So you have a lot of work to do if you want to get in a position where, look, if you go over 500 in the Big 12, like you're making the NCAA tournament, right? Like, so there's still steps and ways. Like, I'm not saying Utah needs to build a team that can beat Kansas and all the things of that nature, but you have to be able to take on some of those other Big 12 teams. And that's a daunting task for a men's basketball program that hasn't been at its strongest recently, right? And of course, I also understand the reasons for panic being Chris Burgess, who came from BYU to Utah and now has gone back to BYU from Utah. And of course, took Keita with him, which we'll discuss in a moment. You also had another assistant coach, I believe Coach Slocum, I could be off on that, went up to Washington to join Danny Sprinkle and his staff. So you've now lost some assistants too. And on top of losing Brandon Carlson, not landing Deivon Smith was obviously a massive blow for this Utah team as well too. And look, we're not in the building, so we don't know what's going on, right? Has Utah struck out on some other players like that? I have no doubt the coaches have gone after some big names. So this is where just things have to get figured out, right? Whether it's an NIL thing, whether it's a recruiting thing, and you're just like, the vision you're selling them on is not there. We're not in the room, so we don't know. But what we do know is that the results are not where we'd like them to be. And this staff knows that too, right? Their goal was obviously to make an NCAA tournament. And I will also say, I think that like some people are like, we have to fire Craig Smith right now. I like, as soon as some of the things went south, won the transfer and everything there, I think that's ridiculous, because if you look at it, he's still taken a step in the positive direction each season in terms of year one, like it's year one, right? But then year two, like a little bit better. This last year, right? You won a game in the Pac-12 tournament and made a run in the NIT. Yes, it's disappointing because you missed out in the NCAA tournament, which was there, but step in the right direction. So you want to see if he can continue that. And I think he's earned the opportunity to make another step in the right direction this coming fall, or this is the 24-25 season. But once again, the problem with that is you're entering the Big 12, an even tougher conference. So that's where it's just going to be really interesting to judge and see where the state of this program is at, because it's tougher to compete in the Big 12 than it was in the Pac-12 in basketball. There are no doubts about that. So there's still a lot of questions that this team has to answer in the transfer portal, and that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what it means that you lose a promising young player in Keita, as well as where this team stands right now. What do they still need to add in the transfer portal? And how do we feel about the 4 additions they've made so far? We're going to be diving into all of that a little bit more momentarily. But first, we have to talk about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer you get to tip-off. They have great last-minute deals, all-in price views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime truly takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can pick out any specific game or matchup that you'd love to attend, and they have so many fantastic deals to make sure you're getting set up in the best spot at a price that works for you. You can save up to 60% off by buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater events, and even more events. They also have flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on selected seats ahead of the game or event. And those zone deals are also huge, where you can save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats for you. You also have my favorite feature. You get a panoramic view of your seat from the app, so you know exactly what kind of a view you're in for when you make your purchase. They also have their lowest price guarantee, where Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference, where Gametime truly takes the guesswork out of buying ticket. They also offer coverage with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. You can download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. And that's capital L for locked, O for on, and then all of the word college is capitalized, no spaces. So again, Locked On College for $20 off. You can download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And now we want to keep talking about Utah men's basketball. So let's keep it rolling by talking about the Keita situation. So Keba was at Utah for the past 2 years. It was a big recruiting get him. I've mentioned this a few times on the show before, but my brother, Jack Wistricll, shout out to him, actually played AAU ball with Keita. So I got an opportunity to see him up close and personal a few years when, he was first starting to generate excitement. And that's what Keba does, right? Generates excitement, those highlight worthy dunks, those massive blocks. It's the thing that made him a fan favorite in certain spots, right? And he got better from year 1 to year 2. This past year, averaged 8 points a game, right? 5.4 rebounds, also 1 block per game, which was pretty good. Just only beat out, of course, by Brandon Carlson's 1.5 block per game. Shot 61% from the field overall, and 56% is not great at the free throw line, but still developing that aspect of his game. But just that athleticism, the ability to play above the rim on both ends of the floor, especially with that growing rim protection and the elite lob threat that he was something that had Utah fans understandably really excited about this next season. Yes, you're losing a Brandon Carlson, but the idea of keeping Deivon Smith and Keita is something that just, once again, it excited you about going into the Big 12, even though it was going to be tough. You got some premier players, and Utah has some other ones on the roster, but those were 2 of the top ones that left you excited. And now they have left the program and are in the transfer portal. So losing to Keba to BYU absolutely hurts when you talk about the experience, the growth, and because of his athleticism and the things that Keba wasn't great at, I would say, was his feel for the game was still evolving at times, right? I remember the first year in particular, and it got better last year, just like balls going through his hands and different things of that nature, right? That's something that has just continued to improve. So you knew that he was only going to get better. He was never a guy who burst onto the scene and you're like, oh, with like some guards who aren't the most athletic, you're like, he's as good as he's going to be. That was never the case with Keba. He's just going to continue to grow and get better. And that was a guy that was, once again, going to be an exciting piece for Craig Smith to have as he enters this tough Big 12 transition. And now Chris Burgess left back to go back to BYU, and he took Keba with him. So it is a tough loss for Utah right now. Just like the Deivon Smith loss was a very tough loss for Utah right now, as Smith committed to play for Rick Pitino over at St. John's. Because, well, I go back to the point I made in the last segment, right? Like, Utah is worse now than they were last season. Let's look at the Utah rotation right now. Like, just projecting, I think Miro Little is probably going to be the starting point guard if nothing is made. He has experience with the Finnish national team. I think he would beat out Hunter Erickson. So I would go Little as the starting guard. I think Gabe and Mason Madsen, the twins, would start together. And that gives you some nice shooting touch, which does leave me encouraged. Then you get a guy in Keanu Dawes coming over from Rice, a really athletic 6'9" forward who's coming off a strong freshman season. And Lawson Lovering starting in the center spot. That's a fine starting 5. But doesn't it feel like it's missing that scoring punch, right? Like, you're really relying on Gabe to do a lot there. And Mason had some big games last year. I want to give him some credit too. I had made a note. He had 7 games with 3 or more made threes last year. But teams right now, if those guys, the other players in that starting lineup, don't develop as they hope, they're going to really do everything in their power to limit the opportunities that Gabe and Mason are able to get, right? And I think Lawson without Brandon, maybe some of the extra touches that he can get in the paint. And I know Utah still worked it into him, but obviously everything more so flowed through Brandon. So you give Lawson more opportunities. That's where the potential is there for him to do more. But I'll go back to the same thing we've been saying, right? Like, this is so much of Utah's basketball success this fall relies on these guys hitting their potential. I know what Gabe Madsen is. Isn't that what we would feel better if we had more Gabe Madsens? And I understand you're not going to have a roster full of proven commodities, but you want a few more. And Utah lost a lot of their proven commodities from last year. I think Miro can be good. He's got to make a massive leap from what wasn't a great freshman year at Baylor, but still one that has some potential showed potential to be something at this level, right? Dawes, that's a huge jump going from Rice now playing up in the Big 12, right? As much as I like some of the flashes and the signs we saw from the 6'9" 4. I mean, he's a guy who had 8 games in double figures. That's pretty good for a freshman, but the competition is about to get a lot tougher too. So that's another area where it gets challenging for me for Utah. So that's the starting lineup. I think it's a fine starting lineup, but really I'm asking, okay, where are some of the points going to, there's going to be nights where that lineup's going to struggle to generate consistent offense in a conference as tough as the Big 12. And you're not getting a lot off the bench, right? Whether right now, like if you had to do a bench 5, it's probably some combination of Jaden Teat, Hunter Erickson. And I like those guys, like Erickson especially. I got to call a lot of his games when he was at Salt Lake Community College, and I thought he did some nice things and settled in as the season went along too, was a positive impact guy. But on a really good team in the Big 12, just based on what he's shown so far, I don't know if he's your first guy off the bench. Hunter, please be watching this and prove me wrong this fall. But I'm just saying after the first season, I think that's where you want to continue to get stronger and grow your backcourt there too. I think Hunter can absolutely still play in the Big 12, but you just need to continue to upgrade and grow the backcourt around him too. And same thing for the forward spots. Like I think Keller has a potential. We'll talk about him a little bit more in the second segment, but I think Caleb Lohner, I know this has been the crazy situation, right? Of him originally being committed to Utah, then going to BYU, then going to Baylor. Now he's back at Utah to play football with maybe some basketball mixed in. I've talked about this earlier this week. I don't see how in the world he's going to play with Utah's loaded tight end room. If he had went to several other teams, you can pitch yourself on how a 6'8", a really athletic, tough, strong power forward / center in today's college basketball could, more so power forward, of course, but like just, you see teams run small sometimes, as Utah would use Keba as a center, as a 6'8" guy, right? But I just think it's going to be very hard for Caleb to play consistently for football. I think more than anything, this is about getting the coaching and the training to hopefully set him up for an NFL opportunity. But I bet he'd like to play college basketball with his last go around. And I think Utah would absolutely love to have him. No, Lohner's not coming off a great season at Baylor, but I think he's got a chance to still do some positive things for Utah. This is a guy who's had success throughout his collegiate career. And I think at a place like Utah, where his numbers, he'll get a little bit more opportunities, his numbers can go slightly up. And I don't expect Lohner to start because I think he's going to focus on training for football. But the physicality and the strength that he provides, I think can be a real asset for this team in limited minutes off the bench. So I'm excited about what he can bring. But yet again, it's the potential, right? We're talking about a guy who I think averaged less than 2 points per game, if I'm remembering correctly, for what Lohner averaged at Baylor last year. And it's kind of just gone down. He never quite lived up to the 4-star billing. There's a reason that he's played 4 years, has this 5th year, and is making a positional change. Positional change is just putting it mildly. He's making a whole on sports change to try and find his future because he'll have an opportunity to play at the NFL. There are just only so many guys who are 6'8" and can move as well as he does at 235. So that's where you see the potential of the switch is there to may have a successful NFL career, but it's going to be tough. And it might compromise his basketball abilities a little bit, but if Utah only needs him in limited minutes, can he help you there? A lot up in the air. And it's just not the year where you want a lot to be up in the air, unfortunately. If you are Craig Smith and you have fans that are frustrated, some that want a coaching change. And that's where it's just going to be very interesting to see how this season plays out for Utah, right? And I think that, if Utah, I don't think it's NCAA tournament or, for me personally, I wouldn't go NCAA tournament or bust for Coach Smith. That might be what some people are thinking. We don't know what the athletic department wants to do, right? But the way I look at it is if you just miss out, if you're almost exactly where you were last year in terms of just missing the cup, but you did in the Big 12, like if this team looks better, we feel good about it. They got some big road wins, but they're just in a tough conference. That's why I'd love to see this staff and this group get an opportunity to run it back again as they continue to try to grow the chemistry of so many players that are coming together. But if they are one of the 3 worst teams in the Big 12, then it might be time for some difficult conversations. Those things are obviously on the table because last season didn't play out how Utah fans were hoping that it would go. So it's going to be really interesting to see what ends up happening for this Utah men's basketball team. And a big part of their success are going to be the transfers. We spent a lot of time talking about Lohner and have touched on a couple of the guys briefly, but I want to talk about what Utah has done adding talent in the transfer portal because we can focus on the positives of what they added and not just completely talk about what they've lost, which have obviously been some big pieces there. We're going to be diving into that in one moment. But first, I want to talk to you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, our friends at Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there is just so much good stuff in this game. I mean, in Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, like unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, or cool new playing pieces to travel the board with. They also have hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton, including their own unique mini games like digging for treasures or a robot machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multiplayers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on the Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. Alrighty, closing this one out, talking about the additions. We talked about Loner. Probably going to be a guy who plays off the bench a little bit. Who knows, depending on how, because this is what's hard, right? If he's going to do football obviously overlaps with basketball. These teams start getting like kind of revved up and going in October, the heart of Utah's season. And if Utah makes a bowl game, he's going to be with them too. So how in the world is this all going to work out? I have no idea. We're in uncharted waters for recent memory, so we'll see what Loner can do. But let's talk about the guys who are for sure on this team, the transfers that Utah has added. And obviously one of the first ones who drew a ton of excitement was getting Keanu Dawes, right? Coming over from Rice. This is a guy who averaged 6 points a game, 4.1 rebounds, started 23 games last year and played about 23 minutes. The potential is there. The length, like we talked about, and he had 8 games in double figures. So I think this is a really good get. But this is another area too where I didn't get a chance to talk about this. This is another thing I wanted to touch on is Utah does need to continue to add to the transfer portal, right? So Dawes is a nice forward. Miro Little, a playmaking guard with potential who showed signs on the national scene, but struggled to play behind some experienced guys at Baylor. So how much did he learn from Scott Drew and those Baylor guards he played behind? Can he come into the Big 12, start on a Utah team and help this Utah team get some wins? We're about to find out. Mason Madsen, I'm a huge fan of the spacing. It's all the rage in college basketball, and I think he can give you some buckets in different ways. But can he do it consistently enough? He still, as we kind of mentioned, had 7 games with 3 or more threes and had a few games in double figures. But obviously, if Utah doesn't add anyone else, which I assume they will add anyone else, but we'll see what level of scoring there are, there's going to be a lot on Madsen's place. And how will he be able to do that? I don't know. That's once again a question because he hasn't been a leader he wasn't a leader on a Boston College team that made the NCAA tournament. He might've been one of the leaders on that team, but, and done some good things, but once again, they fell short of their goal of making the NCAA tournament. And that's what Utah's trying to do this year. And then Keller, didn't get much play, but he did add that 10.5 rebound game against Utah, has shown a little bit of potential over the last 2 seasons. And yeah, hopefully he can just unlock more of it with Utah. But yet again, we go back to potential. And when you have a bunch of unknowns, what do you need to try to do? You need to continue to try to add talent at those spots. So biggest transfer portal needs I have for Utah right now. I think you need a playmaking guard, someone who can do a really good job setting everyone else up. Maybe that can be Little. He ran the Baylor second unit at times with success, but once again, limited reps, limited opportunities. I think would be great for Utah to get an experienced veteran guard who can set the other guys up and be a proven passer, because you lost your 2 top passers in Deivon Smith and Raleigh Worcester and haven't replaced them perfectly as of so far too. Also need a scoring guard. I think someone who can come in off the bench or maybe even be another starter, right? And is just a bucket getter, whether it's, he can be the heat check guy from 3 if he gets it going, has one of those games where he can hit a couple of threes, but especially putting pressure on the defense off the dribble. That's something I don't feel like Utah really has right now. Little could maybe be that guy, but yet again, unknown. So I think they could really use another guard who can get baskets inside, whether that's a 6-man or potentially a starter too. And, just get another center, get another athletic forward, just guys to challenge and push Keller and Dawes and the other guys on Utah's roster, because we want to have the best group of guys out there. Iron sharpens iron. And Utah definitely needs some more irons. They are needing to continue to grow and upgrade this roster if they hope to continue to contend in the Big 12. So it is going to be a fascinating season for Craig Smith and company. It's already shaping up to be a fascinating offseason. They have added some pieces that excite me, but they're complete unknowns at the Big 12 level. And yes, Madsen obviously had success in Boston College, but as of right now, he's going to be asked to do even more with this Utah team. So how's that going to work? We're about to find out. So we're going to continue to monitor how the men's basketball team's offseason goes. If you guys want me to talk more men's basketball, any other sports, make sure you guys tell me in the comments below. But we are obviously going to continue to talk about all the craziness of football. I don't think we'll get every week. I don't think we'll have a news drop like we did last week where Caleb Lohner is coming back to play football and not basketball, but maybe basketball. So there was a wild week on Locked On Utes. I appreciate you guys hanging out as always. Can't wait to be with you next week too, breaking down lots of more fun and exciting content for the University of Utah Athletics. Have a great weekend, everyone. And as always, go Utes.